Welcome to Configuring ScreenOS Firewalls. This is the lesson on the policy options. So in the previous lesson we saw how to set up a basic policy with the required elements of a policy. In this lesson we're going to take a look at what all of the optional elements that there are in a policy, and we'll discuss the most common ones in this lesson and where you can find more information on the remainder of the options that are available in policies. So at the end of this chapter, the objectives would be to be able to turn on and configure the policy options that are available. These include traffic logging, traffic counters, which again, as we discussed in the previous lesson, logging is what's happening on the policy and counters is just counting packets. Being able to apply a schedule to a policy to show when it will be active and when it will be made inactive. And to be able to use user authentication with a policy. So these are all the policy options that we're going to discuss how the implementation works. And of course, once we've configured these options, we want to be able to verify that the settings we expect are in place, or to see what settings for policy options are in place on the firewall. So the organization of the material looks like this. First, we're going to take a look at every option available on the policies and show what they are and what they control. Then we're going to have a look at how to do logging, how to do counting, scheduling, and user authentication. Alright, so let's take a look at all of the available policy options. There are a group of policy options related to preventing attacks on the firewall. These are application options, web filtering options, and deep inspection options. These options have a separate course available for them in the training realm, and they're covered in detail in that intrusion detection and prevention. The next option that's available on a policy is options for traffic shaping. We can do bandwidth restrictions, we can do DSCP markings, quality of service, those types of things. So those are covered in the lesson on using the firewall VPNs in a high performance network, again in a separate program. Previously, in a previous lesson, we had talked about the alarm threshold and what that means to trigger alarms, and so that can be set at a policy level, when you want those alarms to be logged. In a future lesson, we're going to be talking about VPNs. So there is a tunnel option on the policy that gets used with policy-based VPNs, which we'll discuss in that future lesson. NAT can be applied at the policy level, so we will be discussing NAT options in a future lesson, and we'll go over how network address translation gets configured in policies then. And in this lesson, we're going to go over logging. We're going to go over how to configure and see the counters. We're going to go over creating schedules so that your policies can be active only during certain days or times of the day. And we're going to go over the methods we have for authentication on the firewall. The first two are configured and run locally on the firewall, policy authentication and web auth authentication, and the third, infranet, allows your ScreenOS device to work as a companion enforcer for the Universal Access Control product, the IC or the MAG series that we mentioned in the earlier lesson, as a enforcement point for policies from that central radius server. So that is covered in another product line. So these are the options we're going to talk about. These are all of the options available, and basically the ones on the right hand side of this slide are the ones we're going to be discussing in this session. So let's take a look at logging in policies. We want to be able to create logs of what's happening on our policy so that we can see the details of the traffic. You have two choices to log policy from a traffic log. You can do it at the start of the session, which is the more verbose way. As soon as the session starts, it would generate a log, or at the close of the session. So those are the two configuration options. And then these are the fields of information that gets captured into the log so that you can evaluate what's happening with traffic on the log. We will gather the source and destination actual IP addresses of the traffic that hits the policy. We will display the source and destination NAT addresses on the policy. So if any NAT is occurring, it will note what those changes are. It will display the service that the policy is operating on, and it will list the duration of the connection. It will list the reason the connection closed. Did it age out? Did it get a response, etc. And it will list the size of the data that was transmitted across that session. So to turn on policy logging in the command line, you can go into the policy that you want to add logging to. So you would go into, in this case, set policy ID 6, and then you set the log or unset the log to turn on logging. If you're creating the policy for the first time, you add the keyword log at the very end of the policy creation statement. So that can be all on one line, and you can add the keyword log. On the policies in the web interface, we would go to the edit mode on the policy in question. So policy, policies, and then edit next to the policy you want to change. And then there are two checkboxes, whether you do normal logging, which is at session close, or log at the session beginning, or both. So that optional parameter session init in the command line is to log at the beginning of the session. So very straightforward. It's policy traffic logs are simply on or off. To take a look at the logs that have been generated by a policy, you would go in and say get log traffic policy and the number. So in this case, get log traffic policy 1. And then that will pull back the list of traffic that has matched that policy. In the web, there will be an icon that it is displayed on the policy. So here's a policy listening for policy number 1 on the web interface. And you'll notice that there's this icon that looks like a little pencil and a pad. That's where the logs are. If you click on the log button, that will bring up the logs for that session, for that policy. Now, logs are only available while the device is running. They do not persist across a reboot of the device. So if the device gets reset by a power failure or other event, the logs prior to the power failure will not be there. You do not have to manage the size of the logs. So the size of the logs will use the internal storage to the extent that it's available, and it will automatically clean up and remove oldest logs first to make room for new logs. So the more logging you turn on policies and traffic and the like, the more things that write to the flash, the less look back time you have. So what you probably want to do when you configure your logging options is turn on the logs of things you're pretty sure you're going to want to need, and then leave the rest of logging off until you need it, and then you have the longest look back time available. There are also methods where you can extend the storage available on the local device by plugging in a USB, say, thumb drive to the front of the device and using that for logging. There's a tech note on that posted on the class site, so you can see how that works. And of course, all of these logs, as we mentioned earlier, can be sent to a syslog server. So you can configure syslogging to your syslog server and collect the logs there. Counters. As we mentioned in the previous lesson, this is packet counting. Just gives you the rough packet count total that's going on the policy that this is turned on for. So the traffic counters will give you a graphical view of the traffic counted over time in the web interface. So here we have the number of packets going up the side, and the time is on the axis on the horizontal. And then the policy, this is policy 1, so you can see policy 1 has this much traffic with those requisite peaks there across the time. So counter can give you now remember, this is packets, not data size, so this is not necessarily bandwidth, but of course there is a relationship between number of packets and bandwidth. It's just not a direct relationship. Not every packet is the same size naturally. So how do we turn on these counters? We would go to the policy, set policy ID 6, set count, and whether or not it's an alarm level. So if you just set count, the counter has been turned on, and again, if you can add the keyword count to the end of your policy, original policy creation command in order to add the counter to that policy. In the web interface, this is on the advanced tab to turn on. There's so you would go to policy, policies, edit the policy, and then on the bottom of the page hit advanced, and now there's a counter button, and the alarm threshold also gets set there. Okay, to take a look at these counters after they have been created, to just see the count for a policy, get counter policy ID and the number, get counter policy ID 6. We'll pull back the number of packets that have crossed that policy. On the web, there is an icon that also appears on that policy row, and you can see that right here on the right hand side. The counter is this hourglass time icon. So when you click on that hourglass time icon on the web interface, you'll get that screen of the graph we saw earlier. These counting can also be found on the reports menu. Reports policy traffic counting icon. So there is the icon that you see on the reports view. Policies can be scheduled. This is helpful for say usage policies you might have on your network. you can schedule policies so that they can be disabled at a particular time of day. So say you allow certain protocols or things to be accessed during lunch or after hours, but you don't allow them during the day. You can have a block policy that's only active in the morning and the afternoon and off the rest of the time. These will have to be on a recurring time of day and weekly schedule. So for each policy that you configure, there can be 2 time periods during the day when it's turned on. So you can, it's built around that standard allow at lunch, allow before and after work. So you can create, from 9 to noon, from 1 to 5. The policy gets turned on, and each day of the week can have a different one of those 2 hourly blocks. You have 2 hourly blocks each day of the week for 7 days a week, and configure them as you like. You can only have 1 schedule per policy at a time. If this two times per day of the week doesn't work for you, you might have to create multiple policies in order to accommodate the unusual schedule. And what you would do then is when the alternate schedule, say you have an unusual thing going on Thursdays and you need 3 or 4 time periods, you would put the 2 of them into your first schedule, and then you would create another duplicate of that policy and a new schedule that only has the additional 2 times on Thursday and apply it to that policy. So you'd have to get creative in order to do more than 2 time periods in a single day. Naturally, in order to know what time it is, you have to have an accurate timer on the firewall itself. So the recommendation is that you would configure NTP to a good NTP server so that those time values actually work for you. This is how you would configure it. It's a 2-step process. You're going to create the schedule that you're going to use, and then you go to the policy and apply the schedule to the policy. Very straightforward. So let's take a look at how you create a schedule. On the CLI, the keyword is scheduler. Set scheduler, give it a name. In this case, we're calling it IM block. Recurrent, Monday, start 9, stop noon, start 1, stop 5. And you would do that then for every day of the week that you want to be on that schedule. So the next one would be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, etc. On the web, this is a policy element, policy elements schedule, and you will be presented then with your 2 time periods, your 7 days of the week, and allowing you to put the name on the schedule. The other type of schedule you can have is a one-time schedule. So if for a one-time event you need to turn off a policy, you can create a once schedule instead of a recurrent schedule. To apply this schedule to the policy, you have to go into the policy. So here you would add the keyword schedule and IM block, or you would go as we showed earlier, set policy ID 6 and then set schedule IM block. All of these policy related options, you essentially tack the keyword and the value, if there is a value, onto the end of your your master policy statement as it demonstrates here. In the web, you would go to the policies, edit the policy you want to apply the schedule to, and then the schedules are on the Advanced tab. So it's Edit, and then on the bottom hit Advanced, and then there's this little pull-down block. Every policy that you have already created, you can pick from the list. To take a look at those schedules that have been evolved, you would get the scheduler on the command line, and then this lists the two schedules that are created on this firewall: Workday, which is a default one created on ScreenOS when it's installed, and the new one we created called IM block. The Workday is 9 to 5 with no break in the lunchtime. On the right-hand side where it says blocked IM, that's the comment or description that we've put on this schedule. On the web, you would look at these under Policy Elements Schedule, and it will give you the list of the configured schedules on here. So you have your Workday and your IM. In the web, in order to see the detail, you're going to have to click that Edit button. Okay, so our last section here is on user authentication. We're going to talk about this additional layer of security that can be added to certain kinds of policies. User authentication is a way to add an additional layer of security to a policy access. You can require a username and password in order to access whatever resource it is you have configured on the policy. So first, the traffic would have to match the policy, and then it would also require a user password authentication. This user authentication locally on the firewall or the firewall configuration can also be used for your dial-up access to allow people to connect directly to the firewall and access the network. This can apply to any traffic that crosses zone to zone. So if you're say you have a DMZ and a trust zone, and you want to put password protection on accessing certain servers in the DMZ, it can intercept that traffic and do the user authentication. One authentication is all that's required per session. So if you have multiple policies that have this applied, the user will only need to log in once, and their authentication will last for the length of their session plus 10 minutes. So it'll cache that authentication for 10 minutes, and they won't be repeatedly asked to log in as they access new resources. There is a special version of this called WebAuth, which is used only for HTTP access and filtering. There are the products we mentioned in the earlier session where you can use WebSense or the Surf Control in a cloud product to authorize web browsing. So these use intercept HTTP sessions for web authentication. Okay, so we're going to talk first about firewall authentication. Firewall authentication is in line with the traffic, which means the user will either open a web session, a telnet session, or an FTP session that matches this policy. So these are the protocols that are supported on it. Telnet, FTP, and web. When they open these sessions directly with the server, they will be given a prompt for their username or password. With a Telnet session, that'll appear as a text prompt inside the Telnet session. With the others, it'll be presented as a web page prompt. So this will be tied to the policy that has those protocols on it. You attach it to the policy. With WebAuth, it will also be tied to the policy, but web authentication is doing a redirect, and you need to log into the firewall itself. So with policy auth, it's intercepting the traffic. With WebAuth, you need to go to the firewall to log in first. The process is the same for both. You're going to make your access request either to the session or to the firewall. It's going to know there's a policy rule. It's going to respond asking for credentials. It's going to receive those credentials, and then it's either going to authenticate them to the local database that we're going to show how you configure here, or as we mentioned in the previous lessons, you can configure remote servers to do authentication, and it would pass it on to that. So depending on what authentication method you have configured, it will authenticate the session and then allow the traffic. So on firewall authentication, it will be triggered by the policy and the protocol and go back directly to the user dialog. The username and password will need to be presented. And then in an FTP or a Telnet text-based session, it'll be a text prompt. How do we configure this? The first step to do local firewall authentication would be to create a user database on the firewall device itself in ScreenOS. You then need to configure the policy for authentication, and if this is WebAuth, then you need to configure the address that the redirect is being sent to, either the cloud service or the WebSend server. So to create a user database, we would go set user, the name of the user, so test user to user, password, let me in. So username and password is all that's necessary to create the user. On the web, this is under objects, users local, and create the new button, and then you fill out the username and password there in the center of the screen, and check off that this is an authentication user. So we're only using that middle box in the center of the screen there, authentication user, where the username is way up top. To attach this authentication to the policy, here again we're just tacking this onto the back. Auth is the keyword, so just by adding the word auth at the end of the policy, or if it's an existing policy, set policy ID and then set or unset auth. On the web, we edit the policy and then go to the advanced button, and there's this section for authentication, so we're choosing an auth server of local as our authentication, and then you can see WebAuth is in the middle there. And the third variety we mentioned at the intro, the intranet, would be on the bottom, and you would have to indicate where that intranet controller is. So auth and WebAuth are the two we're talking about here, using the local user database. To configure the WebAuth address, you would add this to the interface where this traffic is at. So it's the WebAuth keyword, and then you also have to tell what, if you do plain WebAuth, it's everything that's covered with it, which is both HTTP and HTTPS, or you can do HTTP or SSL only. And then you need to enter the IP address of where you're redirecting the traffic for your WebSense server. On the network interfaces edit, you would add this IP address for the web authentication. To verify that this configuration is in place, we use our get command, get user all. You can see all the users. Get auth table, you can see the active users. So you can see who's actually in there. In policies, there is a user icon that gets displayed, and that's where you will see the connected users on that policy. So in this session, we looked at some specific policy options that are available and how to configure them. We took a look at what all the policy options available were, and how to configure traffic logging, traffic counters, add a schedule to a policy, and add local user authentication to a policy. Now, there is the ability to create external authentication servers on the ScreenOS. As we mentioned in the earlier lessons, we're not covering those procedures here, but you can authenticate to Radius servers and other external server devices instead of the local database. And remember, there is a user limit, as we mentioned previously, on the local database of 20 users. So these are sufficient for simple and small operations, but you'll want to investigate using external authentication in your directory services for larger setups. And finally, we looked at the verification and monitoring options that are available for these particular policy options. These options are all chosen for this session because these are the functionalities that you'll see in the ScreenOS JNCIA exam. So they are covered in the exam portion of this, where the more advanced ones are not, but they are available to you. If you have any questions about the material that's presented in this session, you can feel free to post them in the public forum for the class and answer questions if you know the answers yourself as well. If you'd rather not do that in public, you can contact me via the class website, and I do respond to messages that I receive. I thank you for your kind attention on the lesson here on policy options, and hope you'll continue to plow on in the course on the configuring Juniper ScreenOS firewalls.